what if I told you that Boruto has already lost? That the moment he opened his mouth and made that desperate deal with Momoshiki, his fate was sealed. Because when you line up the events of Boruto, the mechanics of how the Ōtsutsuki operate, and the whole idea of a binding vow, something terrifying starts to emerge. And if I'm right about this, it means Momoshiki has already won. Not in some distant future or one day when Boruto slips up. The process is already in motion. You see, Momoshiki has always been the long game player. He has never been about brute force like Kinshiki or Ishiki. He's a schemer, a manipulator, a parasite who thrives on inevitability. And the scary thing is that Boruto has fallen right into his web. Not through some overwhelming jutsu, not through some god tier battle, but through his words. Because in Boruto 2 Blue Vortex chapter 25, when Boruto literally says, "If you help me, you can take my body," he didn't just throw out a casual bargain. What he does in that moment is create the conditions for what I'd call a binding vow. And if you're familiar with Jujutsu Kaisen, you already know where this is going.
Well, how about this then? We'll fight to the death and I'll do it without conditions if you defeat me. But if I win, then you live only under my two conditions.
Yeah, I'll kick your ass for...
In JJK, binding vows are unbreakable promises, where the conditions themselves reinforce reality. If you set the terms, then the power of the universe enforces them. It's not again jutsu, it's not chakra manipulation, it's law. For example, Yuji and Sukuna had a binding vow. Sukuna promised to fix Yuji's heart and revive him, but he had two conditions. 1. Itadori had to agree to allow him to take over his body for 1 full minute when he says "enchain." And 2. Once the vow is made, Yuji will forget about the agreement. Now Yuji did reject the vow itself because he was afraid that he would go on a killing spree using his body, which is totally in character for Sukuna. That is why Sukuna added a second clause in the agreement, which is that he won't hurt or kill anyone within that minute. He then offered Yuji a fight to the death within their metaphysical plane, similar to the space where Boruto and Momoshiki inhabits. If he wins, he revives Yuji under the contract of the binding vow. But if Yuji wins, he gets revived with no conditions. And of course, Sukuna was the victor. Yuji was then revived and lived his life without any knowledge of the deal he made, because that was one of the conditions. So when Sukuna came to collect in chapter 113, it came as a surprise to everyone. And even though one of the clauses in the agreement was that he couldn't hurt or kill anyone, that didn't include self-harm. So he was able to enact his plan to possess Megumi's body by transferring his essence to his finger, ripping it off and forcing Megumi to swallow it. A key detail here is that Sukuna waited until Megumi was not emotionally stable, which made it easier to take control of his body. This of course isn't unique to JJK because that is typically how possessions work in pretty much every horror film. The entity usually works to break down its target until they're vulnerable enough to inhabit. And the same will likely happen with Boruto and Momoshiki. Now imagine this system applied to Boruto. Momoshiki, being an Ōtsutsuki, already deals in karma, genetics, and inevitability, would be the perfect candidate to exploit this kind of mechanic. And Boruto, in his desperation, laid out his terms. "Help me now and you can have my body." He may have unknowingly entered into exactly that kind of binding pact. And this isn't just wild speculation pulled from nowhere. We actually have evidence in Boruto itself that this kind of vow-like system exists to some extent. Think back to Kinshiki's absorption. People treat it like, oh yeah, Kinshiki was just father and Momoshiki consumed him. But there's more to it. The scene itself was ritualistic. It was ceremonial. Kinshiki didn't resist, he offered himself. Like it was law. He even literally says, "Use me." That wasn't random. That was a precedent. A model for how Ōtsutsuki sacrifices and power transfers are structured. It was a pact, and that pact gave Momoshiki the next stage of power, and once it was done, there was no one doing it. Momoshiki evolved and Kinshiki was gone forever. Now this also makes sense given the context surrounding this unusual ability. Some have argued that since Momoshiki has the ability to transform entities into fruits and consume them, he should be able to beat anyone. He could simply defeat any Ōtsutsuki, whether it's Kaguya, Shiki, or even Shibai himself. Maybe this even extends to humans, which makes him a very dangerous opponent. The problem, of course, is that this never happens. Momoshiki never uses this ability to win his battles, nor is it factored into any power analysis for the character. It seems like something that is only possible under a very special condition, and that condition is likely a binding vow. Kinshiki said something very interesting while on the verge of being absorbed. He said Momoshiki should consume him, just as his guardian entrusted him with his power. This implies that Kinshiki himself once benefited from this process when he once had a guardian. And now that he's Momoshiki's guardian, he's always ready to fulfill that duty at any given moment. So it could be the case that these guardians must enter a binding vow with their masters, which is what allows this process to take place. Chapter 25 doesn't show some flashy absorption ritual, but it does show the same framework. Boruto is Kinshiki here. He doesn't even realize it, but by speaking those words, he's putting himself into the same position Kinshiki did. He's laying the groundwork for Momoshiki to evolve once again, except this time, the evolution isn't about gaining raw power, it's about gaining permanence. And here's the chilling part, once those words are spoken, they can't be taken back. Momoshiki is way too smart to miss that. He has been waiting for this crack, this moment of desperation where Boruto gives him something verbal, something concrete. Because ever since Boruto got the karma mark, Momoshiki has been playing the long game. He has been patient. He hasn't forced the takeover yet because he knows Boruto is cautious. He's aware and determined to resist, which is why he has been quiet for over 2 years. With that said, let's take a closer look at what this binding vow could actually mean. In Jujutsu Kaisen, the mechanics work like this. The harsher the condition, the stronger the outcome. If I say I'll die if I break this vow, then breaking it is impossible. Momoshiki can't just snatch the body whenever he feels like it. The vow has to have structure. The trade-off has rules, which means the more desperate Boruto gets in future fights, the more likely it is that he has to cash in on that deal. And the second he does that, the vow activates, and Momoshiki gets his prize. That of course being Boruto's body. That is why this entire situation is so crazy. Boruto thinks he's buying time, he thinks he's manipulating Momoshiki, keeping him on the back burner as a failsafe of sort, but in reality Boruto has already spoken the words of his own undoing. And let's not forget, this isn't unprecedented. Remember, Naruto and Kurama had their own pacts. They weren't binding vows in the JJ Kaisens, but they carried similar weight. But here's the thing, Naruto was dealing with a tail beast, whose nature could be influenced, whose hatred could be tempered. Boruto isn't dealing with Kurama, he's dealing with Momoshiki, an Ōtsutsuki parasite whose only goal is to resurrect himself. So it's a similar system, but it has a completely different beast. With that said, let's imagine different ways this binding vow could play out. Scenario 1 could be that Boruto gets cornered, Momoshiki offers to help, Boruto agrees, and boom, the vow activates, and Boruto's body is now Momoshiki. Simple, tragic, inevitable. Scenario 2 is the sneaky path. Momoshiki doesn't wait for some grand, desperate moment. Instead, he manipulates Boruto into using him in small ways, nudging him into situations where Boruto thinks he's just borrowing a bit of power, just cheating once or twice to survive. Each time Boruto leans on that deal, the vow strengthens, until one day Boruto realizes that it's too late, and Momoshiki already has permanent control. And that's why I keep saying that Boruto isn't just fighting against the Ōtsutsuki, he's fighting against the weight of his own words. The same way Kinshiki's words sealed his fate, Boruto's words may have also sealed his, and Momoshiki knows this. He's playing the long game. Now the real question is, why would Momoshiki go the binding vow route instead of just waiting until Boruto is on his last leg and just simply possess his body? Well, the answer is simple. It's called risk management. If If he tries to take Boruto's body by force, Boruto resists, Kawaki interferes, Sarada steps in, and suddenly it's a battlefield. Too much chaos, too much unpredictability, but a binding vow that's clean. It doesn't matter how strong Boruto gets and how many allies he gathers, when the vow condition is met, the takeover is law. No fighting, no resistance, just inevitability. So if Boruto was planning on not giving Momoshiki his body in the end, or planned on restricting Momoshiki so Kawaki could kill him, that isn't going to work. Momoshiki is smarter than that, or at least he should be. Also, this ties perfectly back to Momoshiki's prophecy. Those blue eyes shall eventually take everything from you. For the longest time, fans debated what that meant. Does Boruto lose his family, his village, or his humanity? But if you view it from the lens of a binding vow, the answer is simple. Boruto loses himself. His blue eyes, the symbol of his identity, becomes the very weapon that strips him of his body. So when you think about it, Boruto's current path might not be about preventing Momoshiki's takeover anymore. That battle is already lost. The real story could be about Boruto trying to outsmart the vow itself, to find a loophole, to break an unbreakable promise. And if you know anything about binding vows, you know that this is nigh impossible. With that said, let me end on this possibility. What if Momoshiki planned this ages ago? What if his being silent, drenched in despair, Boruto not being able to control his karma? What if all of this has been leading to this moment? Not to crush Boruto physically, but to maneuver himself into speaking the words of his own downfall. If that's the case, I think we underestimated Momoshiki, or at least I did. If you guys liked the video, drop a like down below and also comment your thoughts to let me know what's going on. And if you're new, subscribe and ring that noty bell to be notified when I post more content. With that said, I'll see you guys soon. Peace.